how do we get to this pattern? So the main way, yes, of making a pattern like this comes from masking. So masking and breaking up the things is gonna be the best way for you to actually build something like this. Why? Because you have more control. How many of you know what the flat fill node is and how does it work?
You need like a sharp delimitate, like black line between your patterns, or it won't work. So you cannot like blur it or distance it too much, and it's gonna allow you to have like random grayscale, random gradients, and a bunch of very useful stuff.
Now, for this mask, what I wanted to show you is the vector warp grayscale. So yeah, today I wanted to do this a small session, well, not small, a little bit longer, about specifically creating the height, the normal map, and also about how we use the reference to guide ourselves into creating the material we want to do. So if we want to actually create, you know, a good material, and this is something pretty basic, but many people kind of forget about it while starting to make a material, is having good reference images for gathering. I'm gonna organize a little bit, yes. So having good reference doesn't mean you have 100 or 1000 images in your pure drive that has a lot of different kind of like the same surface but in different ways. That's not good reference. Good reference is a reference that provides you some certain level of value that you can use later. Yes. So let's say, for example, right now you're seeing I have a lot of images in here and some of them are from Quixel. So I'm gonna go to that later, but I want to show you something else right now in particular. So I divide usually my images, my reference images, in different parts. So the first part I usually divide it on is first, in this case, the pattern. So I try to look for images, like for example this one, which doesn't have high quality. When we mean about high quality, and here you have the rate comparison, is that the left image is from Pinterest, yes, and it doesn't have so much quality. If I zoom in, I'm not gonna be able to see the surface detail of this, but what I do see, and really good, is the pattern. Yes, I can see how the pattern of the bricks have made. I can see how the overall shape of the bricks are made. This one has sharp edges. This one is a little more, you know, round because have been destroyed on the edge. This one is full inside. Some of around here are a little bit destroyed. So I have a lot of variation that I can see from far away, sorry. And at the same time, I can see the pattern, which is quite interesting. So in this case, when we are building a brick wall, we don't want to build the classic brick wall that everyone is building. We want to build something different, something new, something that it's not what you have seen lately in ArtStation maybe or in others' portfolio. You want to build something a little more interesting, yes? So having a really nice brick pattern, that's a first step. The more complex your pattern gets, the more interest you're going to cut with your artwork, yes? And of course, the harder it will get to make this work procedurally. So on my right, yes, I have the normal map of a material from Quixel. Now I got this recommendation from Sam Brown. He's an NVIDIA artist. I've been seeing a lot of his artwork lately, and he borrowed me one of his graphs on a brick wall. And I remember I asked him, hey, how are you managing to see every single detail out of your reference images? Because I don't think you're making this out of your mind. You're looking this into something and you're building this. How is it that you do that? And he told me, go to Quixel, download the texture you want to do, and look into the normal map, and you're gonna see every detail. And in fact, he was right. If I zoom in, I'm gonna be able to see every single detail of every part of this material, and I'm gonna be more precise when I want to build these details. Yes. So once we have that, we also want to get a little bit of the base color images, just to have a little bit of some variation. So what happens when we start making the material? So we have our reference. Now we're going to start to make our material. So the first thing you need to do is you need to understand you need to focus on bigger things to smaller things. Not talking about problems. I'm talking about when you look at this material, the first thing you see, for example, in this specific image, is the different surface you have and the different patterns. You see different shapes. So for example, I see this section around here which has bricks and cement, and then I see these columns around here, these cement patches, bricks and bricks. Then if I want to focus in a section in particular, I'm gonna look something else. I'm gonna see the brick pattern where we have large, smaller brick. Yes, then we have another column of different size of bricks, and so it goes on. Then if I want to look even further and I zoom in, I'm gonna see bricks are being broken. Yes, they have cement everywhere. They've been broken on the edges. Yes, in some diagonal cuts. And if I zoom in even more, I'm going to start to see even micro details. So if that's the way we are receiving it from afar, that's the way we should build it. So always, when you want to build something, you need to focus in the big picture first, and then you go and you start to make detail by detail. Yes. So in this case, we start with what is the pattern. Yes, the brick wall pattern. So for this particular case, when you are building patterns, I would suggest that you don't use your 3D view. I would suggest that you only use your 2D view. Why? Because we are talking about the pattern. The pattern is not something that needs or has to be used with a 3D image, but it's something that you can easily see in a 2D image. And if it catches your attention in a 2D image, it will for sure do it in a 3D one. Yes. So how do we get to this pattern? I already made a post about it, but let's get a little bit over it. So the main way, yes, of making a pattern like this comes from the masking. So masking and breaking up the things is gonna be the best way for you to actually build something like this. Why? Because you have more control. It's gonna be a little bit harder maybe to set up as something procedural later, like exposing parameters and so on. But in this case, it's gonna be easier for you to build it if you do one step at a time. And when I mean one step at a time, I try to divide things into different subjects and then blend them together. For example, in this one, I make a specific brick pattern, yes, which is quite, let's say, constant in it. Maybe the bricks are not aligned as one would like to, but they have all the same shape, they have all the same spacing between them, and you can clearly see this while I'm trying to scroll around. Now, then I did a second tile generator, and this is exactly the same pattern, but now it has different details, yes? So as you can see here, the change, they're in the same place, but they have different alignments, they have different sizes, and we blend them, yes, by using a mask. So how many of you know what the flat fill node is and how does it work?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, well, what is used? What do you use that for?
You need like a sharp delimitate, like black line between your patterns, or it won't work. So you cannot like blur it or distance it too much, and it's gonna allow you to have like random grayscale, random gradients, and a bunch of very useful stuff.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty, like, that would be like more the more simple explanation, which is actually quite good. So in, like, if we want to get a little more technical and we want to talk about it, flat fill works, yes, with shapes that have 1 pixel of distance between them. If you overpass that pixel of distance, it's not gonna take the shape, or it's gonna make the whole shape together. Yes, so if for example I get here my pattern with a blur. Yeah, I'm gonna lower it down, set it to 0.1, and I get a flat fill. My flat fill is gonna work, you see? Now I'm gonna go to my blur, I'm gonna start increasing the intensity, so you see what I'm talking about. So around here, our pixels haven't touched, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they haven't. But when I get around, let's say, because it's really, oh, not moving anything. Around here where the pixels start to merge, okay, it didn't work that much. Let's go a little bit further. Okay, we still have space. Let's go more. It stops working. And this happens in different ways. So let's go the other way around. Let's see it around here. So you see how it starts to appear, the negative space between the bricks as I'm lowering the intensity of the blur. That's because the space between those, yes, here we have more space than in these parts, and in these parts there's more of a pixel of distance, when in this one there's not. So flat fill, what it's doing, it's turning this information, it's let's say identifying each shape, and it's turning it into RGB information, yes? And it's using that RGB information to generate different filters that will give us random grayscale maps or other kind of or color maps as well, that will be useful for us later, as said before. So in this case, we're gonna use just the flat fill to random grayscale and a histogram scan. Yes, in fact, I don't know why this brick is like that, but that's fine. Just to choose where we want our bricks to appear. So let's hope this doesn't blow up because it's taking 98% of my memory. But if I move this upwards, you're gonna see that more of my bricks are gonna change. This is really quite simple masking, but for some reason people forget when they're trying to build a little more complex patterns, and they try to look for more complex way. The more simple you can build something that looks complex, the better it's gonna be for you. That's something quite important. As for example, the next step. So in my reference, in this case, for example, we have one line of large bricks and one line of short bricks. Then what I realized is that not all the long bricks are exactly the same. If we look in here, we have a line of long bricks, and yet this one in the middle is not that long. In fact, in this one, we have a combination of short, long, medium, short, long again. So how can we create a little bit of this, in this case, a little bit of this variation? It goes as simple. Okay, so it goes as simple as first, we need to select where we're gonna have our larger bricks. That's how I did it, yes? So what I did in order to make a mask or to remove the bricks I didn't want to, as shown in this specific mask, is the following. I use the tile generator, and I change two things that usually people don't look at. And I'm gonna show you here so I don't generate any kind of trouble. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm using the same X and Y amount than my tile generator, my brick generator. You can see it here. But the only thing I'm changing is that I'm using an image input. So in here, I'm not using any kind of image input. I'm using the square, and I set the parameters, yes, to match this shape. Usually, you know, it moves around here. You might need to use the inch size. And it's better if you use the tile generator than the tile sampler, as tile sampler is way more expensive. You can see here the milliseconds it takes. So in this case in particular, the tile generator has something quite particular that people don't know or they haven't explored that much. That is that when you get an image input, yes, and you set that image input to more than one, and you left one of those image inputs unattached, meaning with no kind of information input, it's gonna show you no information. Actually, it's gonna show black information. So if that is true, then if I set a shape, yes, turn it into a long line, I'm gonna have a black space, a white line, black space, white line, black space, white line, and it comes like this. So let's get this a little bit backwards. I'm gonna put, yes, pattern input number to 1, image input, and where things come interesting, where you can make this change, is that here should be in random. When you put the tile generator here, yes, let me create it again, and you go to image input, your pattern input distribution is going to be in random. This means that it doesn't matter in which order you put things, this is going to be completely random. And let me make another example here. As you can see, it's gonna place things in different positions without having like a logic behind it. Now, if I change this from random by pattern number, it's gonna have an order, and that order is gonna be depending on how you plug in things. So if I change both of them places, they should change of place as well. You see how it goes and change from one to the other. So by doing this, what we achieve is basically getting this into pattern number. Oh, I have to do the second one, sorry. So you set it to pattern input number 2, and you're gonna have one line, no line, one line, no line, and that's what you subtract, yes, to your main brick pattern. So once we have that, what is going to happen basically is we want to build, yes, the details of long bricks to smaller bricks, and we want only to affect these bricks. So before adding anything else, we're gonna tend the separation of bricks, and I wanted to be like super quick with this. So what I basically did is, again, I got a tile sampler, yes, pretty much similar to the one we built before, but with no pattern input. Set the same parameters in X and Y, and the only thing I did was actually I shortened the length of the bricks into different shapes. So I got a overall 0.98, as you can see here. So we don't kill the PC once again. There we go. So if I go to my inch size and start to move to the left, meaning closer to 0, it's gonna go to its original pattern. But if I go to the right, it's gonna get closer and closer and closer to almost being nothing. And if you set this to random, each of them is going to be completely different. Now you need to have a little bit like You need to play a little bit with this, because if you go too much with the random, you're gonna see that the bricks you're gonna cut are way too big, and it might not look like that much natural. So from here, I just subtracted to my main bricks, and you see how this changed. You see how now in one column I don't only have like long bricks, but I also have small bricks, and I even have columns which only has like long bricks. That's a little more natural to our look, and it's more procedural. So again, if you want to have more control over it, what you need to do is again create another flat fill, a flat fill to random grayscale, and a histogram scan, and you're gonna be able to control where you want these things to appear. So right now I can pretty much change anything, but if I don't change my histogram scan or my flat fill to random grayscale, the details we find here are not gonna change of place or actually affect what we do. And what we can do with this is actually control. If I directly subtract all of this into my brick pattern, what is going to happen is that it would stop being a detail. And this is something really important. Many people do this without actually masking, you know, what they are trying to build, and that's a huge mistake. When you have built something supposedly to be a detail, yes, and you put it everywhere, it stops being a detail and it starts to be part of the composition of the material you have been doing. So if you want something you are building to stay as a detail, you need that thing to be specifically in places or not everywhere at least. So the next step would be filling out the small bricks parts, which in this case what I did was I went over what we did before with the long bricks into these small bricks right here. Yes, one that has only the small bricks in the order I want, nothing weird, and then the other one that has a little bit of, you know, size variation, they turn in different ways and so on. So I combined them, inverting the mask that I was generated before to subtract the previous bricks. Yes, and that's how you actually build these brick walls. So this takes us to the next point. So if I zoom in into our 2D image, you're gonna see that our bricks, yes, right here, are too sharp. So if I take a normal map in here and set the scale to 5, the intensity to 5, I'm gonna see that this is just way too sharp, and bricks in real life aren't that sharp. They usually have a small bevel on them. So the best way of doing this kind of bevel is by controlling information by blurring it out, yes, and arranging it with, yes, a levels. So you see how this goes from really like a line in the edge to having a little bit more shape. This is mainly because we are using a blur to expand the information of our bricks. Yes, so if I go around here and I set this to 0, you're gonna see that the line is quite sharp. If I set this to something like 0.2, you're gonna see that now the pixels are starting to expand. Now, if I add levels, yes, and I start to control just the information, you're gonna see that I'm gonna start to change the shape of it. And once again, I'm gonna change the shape of my bricks to something completely different in this case. So, in this particular case, this is not the only way of using it. What I did was I grabbed and I did an overall change on my bricks that you can see everywhere. We went from like having really sharp edges to having this small detail of a little bit more of like bevel in the edges. And I also had some of these bricks in this shape, because not all of these bricks were like super sharp. Some of them were actually a little bit more round, so I wanted to go into something like that. And once you have finished that part, you basically completed the part of creating the patterns and the shape of your bricks. But now comes the more like hard part of this, which is actually getting into the details, and this is where most people get lost on. People get lost a lot on this kind of task because first, they don't have the right reference, as I said before. Their reference may not be too accurate to what they need to do. And in other terms, they also have this, let's say, something quite, I think, normal with when you're starting to learn something designer, that maybe you build something you like, and you get too much excited, and when you get too much excited, you just start, you get into a loop, or let's say in the zone, where you start making things and things and things and things, and you don't really look into your reference and don't give yourselves a time to stop and see what you are doing and how your reference is looking, and you keep on working and working and working until you take a break, and when you come back, you realize that everything you have done it has nothing to do with the material you want to build. And that's actually quite normal. It's not something that you are special about it. No, it happens to many people. It happened to me for a long time, and it's quite simple. So if you want to work a little bit better on that, yes, what you might want to do is grab any kind of reference and try to divide, yes, your pattern into several small steps. Yes. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus first on the edges. Yes. So I build the shape of our bricks. I build the pattern of our bricks. Now I want to focus on the edges, and I want to break them down as small as I can and detail as I can. I'm going to go from, if I was not mistaken, in this case, I selected to go with hard detail to smaller details. Yes, let's see. So when you're trying to do this, another way of also kind of, I forgot of this, of making sure that you are on the right path is actually having a normal map node with the same intensity you have in your last node to check that what you are doing is on the right place. So you have on your 2D graph, you have your normal where you see everything, and in your pure ref, you have this, the normal map of your material. So you can start comparing, and you have a better look of what you are actually doing. In here, what I did was something I do it automatically. I did a flood filter random grayscale to add a little bit of height variation to my bricks. Then I use a blend with a min to kind of like soften my bricks. Usually when you use a blend and with a min and a uniform color of grayscale information, what you do is you kind of like, you soften the surface of the material or the shape you have, basically. It's actually quite a good trick to start with. So in this case, there wasn't much of like high difference in this case, so I want them to be all at the same level. So around here, I started making, yes, my edge details, and I want to, let's kind of make a small game. I want you to guess what's the value of intensity I use with a slow blur, with this slow blur right here, the first one. What do you think is the intensity I've used in this one?
0.005.
Another guess?
0.01.
Okay, yeah, I heard someone else trying to talk as well. 0.05, 0.1, which would be the winner? Let's see. 0.0015. So I went super low to make this detail. And something really common when trying to do this, and I see a lot of people doing, is that they think that 0.1 it's small enough, but it's actually not small enough. You see the result I'm getting. So if I want to get the same result I have in my normal image at my left and my PRF, and I want to make the same on my Substance Designer, I need to understand that this parameter, I can take it down even to a really stupid value. Yes, and of course right here is not taking any kind of effect, so that means I need to go higher. So how I try to make, or how do I explore myself when I try to make something, you know, work with a slow blur or any kind of node that has really strong effects. So what I do is I always go to 0.1, yes, and I see how it looks. Once I see how it looks and I say, hey, this is not right, what I do is I add a 0, yes. If this doesn't work, I add another 0, yes. Now, if I feel I can go, if I could pull this a little bit stronger, then I add a 5 at the end, yes. And that's how I build it. So I go on building this step by step, adding 0 by 0 on the intensity, going from something really small to something a little bit stronger. You don't want to start with something like this because you know this is not real. You want to make this as real as it can, so you need to go lower into the values, yes. So for this case, I just use a clouds 2, really tiled with a blur, yeah, and I'm using a mask here, yes. It's a custom branch and a pearly noise multiplied, so I can have this not in every single like edge. Like for example, if I show you here in my normal map, you're gonna see this all everywhere. If I put my mask here, you're gonna see that now it's not everywhere. It's more of a detail. It's not that much present. Yes. So I did another slow blur on top with the same mask, but this one has more strong edges. You can see here. You can see that this one is exactly the same, but I have 0.0010 more value, and I blend them with a similar mask. So now I have something different, you know. So I went from basically this So basically this, by just using really low values and having a good mask. I wouldn't say a good mask, but a mask that actually generates a little more variation on it. So many people think that when you're working on your edges, if you want to make up like edge destruction, you need to use a Clouds 2 as an image input, and they are really wrong about that. There's a lot of ways of actually making, yes, details on your edges by using different, yes, image inputs. Let me show you here. So you see how this is different from what we got from a Clouds 2. It's quite different, and there's a reason for that. So if you want a little bit of a better explanation about this, or how the slow blur works, it goes pretty much like this. It has three different modes. So blur mode is gonna combine min and max mode. The min mode, what it's going to do, it's going to, let's change the map. It's going to take, not this one again. Okay, let's use another one. This is probably noise better. So the min mode, what it's going to do, it's going to take the edge inwards. Yes, it's bringing the edge inwards to our material, as you can see here. But if we want to take them outward, we need to use the max. So you see that now the edges are going outward. They're not going inwards anywhere, and it's following this mask. So max push things outwards and min push things inwards. And blur, it just does both things at the same time. So that's how it works. So if you have a mask which has points and you set your slow blur to put things inwards, where there is a point, your shape is gonna go inwards in that same shape. So if you want to make details like this is a really good way. So let's move forward. Yes, we're going to this one, So this is a little bit more of edge detail. Yeah, you can see it here. It's really small detail. Then we come to this one. Again, we're just going from edge detail to edge detail. Try to look like we are always using, you know, a slow blur, but I'm using different kind of slope inputs, and as of course I'm using different masks as well. And then we come to the surface detail part, and this is one of the most, I wouldn't say the most, or the second most difficult part for most people, because again, we tend, when we are learning substance designer, we are really used to making things really fast. And we already have a gallery in here in your library. It doesn't allow me. Yes, we have a library here which is called texture generators, where we're gonna have a lot of like branches, and we are really used to just throw the branches in, and that's all of it. But actually, what we can do in order to be more precise is create our own branch, but add it to the material in different layers. Yes, with different intensities. Let me show you. So here I did a little bit more of edge detect. This should be round backwards, but doesn't matter. So this is where we start to make a difference, yes, in the actual surface. So here I add a little bit of high variation over the surface, like if the brick has been, you know, hidden by something. And then I start by adding broken parts, yes, some broken parts on top of it. I haven't added any kind of fine details. From there, we did more broken parts, but in this case, more intense. Following up by extra in different shapes. And finalizing with some grains on top. So let's get back to these three. So with these three, what I did was I started to create a detail that was broken over the bricks, and I start to change their shape. So I think that in this one in particular, we are not actually breaking things, we're just adding a detail to the broken part. So in this case, if I wanted to build this again, what I did was, so I made my own kind of pattern. Yes, I made my pattern. Well, let me follow the link because it's actually quite for the cement, this one. So what I made in here was a little bit more let's say untraditional, might say someone. So I use a purling noise and a histogram to get a more defined shape. I use a Gaussian spotlight and a max lighting to add a little bit more of extra information, and I warp this by generating a different, yes, noise here. And this is actually a great way of generating noise. So let me bring this backwards. So go back to where we should be. And let me show you a little bit of how to create, yes, your own noise, or let's say grunge map, by generating different things. So every grunge map has this particular, let's say, parameter. Let's see, let's try grunge, yeah, this one. Let's see if this one has it. No, this one doesn't have it. So let's go to the old ones. Let's go to server 13. This one has it. Yes. So every single, yes, of this grunge map has what we call brush pattern. So if you start to lower the brush pattern, what's going to happen is you're going to realize that it's going to lower, or let's say shrink, the pattern you're seeing. Now, if you want to do this by hand, what you can do is the following. Let's say I want to go back to grunge rough 30, yes, the one I had before, which doesn't have the brush pattern. Well, what I can do in this case is actually create a shape node, yes, that is going to have that if I multiply one for each other, I'm gonna be taking the whole information. But if I lower the scale, you're gonna see that I get this. But now I have a sharp edge. So I don't want to have that sharp edge, because if I mix this several times, it's just gonna show where the edge is. So I'm gonna blur it, yes. And I have a really nice one. Now, if you wanna go a little bit stronger, maybe you could do this, but I wouldn't recommend it so much, just to make a little bit of sharp details on the edge, so it's not that uncomfortable, and you have something more like this that is aligned to the grunge you are using. So if you change your grunge, let's say I change it from that one to this one, it should work basically the same, and it does work the same, yeah. But in order to do this, we get this kind of image. So what we're going to do with this image right now, we're gonna get these two of them. I'm gonna blend them together with a copy by half, something like this, and I put it here. And now look how it changed. Now, in order to do this, what you need to do is you need to create a tile sampler. I'm gonna plug this into a pattern input. I'm gonna delete this one actually. We're gonna set this to pattern input, yes. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna increase the scale as much as we can. Do a lot of scale random. We might want to lower this one. Let's do a 5x5 in this case. And we're gonna get as much random position as we can, and rotation random, because we want these to be different layers of detail. And if you want to go a little bit stronger with it, you can go with a color random right down in on the end, and you're gonna see how this changes a lot. And this is quite a great way of actually generating detail in different grayscale maps, as you can see, in order to, I don't know, you can use it for surface, for warps. You can even use it with a grayscale, with a gradient map, sorry. Yes, to generate more detail. Let's say I'm gonna go here and I want to get the gradient map. I want to do something more like this, and I can generate a lot of detail in my grayscale, in my color this way. Yes, by generating my own grunge map. So this is actually quite a really smart way of doing it. So after we generate our grunge map and we generate our specific shape, the only thing I'm doing here is just adjusting this and lowering the scale and blurring a little bit in order to subtract it to our main brick. Yes. So the surface detail, in this case, I divided in two parts because I wanted to build first a level of detail, then another, and then repeat the same step but in different ways. So in this case, what we are gonna have after making this specific noise is start to break more our brick, as you can see. And as you can see right here, it's actually quite messy. This is actually quite messy, but it's gonna take time. It's gonna take sense later. Yeah, so we're gonna move forward. Yes, again, right here, what I'm doing is just generating different spots, yes, of information where I can subtract, and I'm repeating. In these two cases, we are using the same map. The only thing is that in the second, yes, blend node, what we're doing is we are just tiling the same noise and subtracting again into our bricks. So it's basically we have big distraction, small distraction to like kind of pair the map. So we're gonna move forward and forward. I think this one is pretty much the same than the one before, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check. Yeah, they're pretty much the same. And here it comes the surface detail too. And this one might be the one of the most interesting because you're gonna see how it changed when I add this on top. And you're gonna see that in each brick is actually quite different. So let's get a little bit on into this one. So as you have seen before, for the tile sampler, what we did was kind of like grab a noise and mask it. We're doing the same here. Yes, we did the same with the moisture, and we did it using, in this case, a multi-directional warp, and it actually worked quite well. And it's, in this case, I think it's smarter than a warp. So the multi-directional warp, as the name says, it starts to warp things in multiple directions. So you can choose the direction you want it to go, from one direction to 2 directions and 4 directions. And well, you have different kinds of direction modes. In this case, I used min because it's the one I really wanted to, where things get inwards. Change actually destroys too much your map, so I didn't want it to have that. And in this case, I use a tile generator, which is pretty much the same as using the tile sampler, but in this case, it's just less cost. After that, I made a little bit of arrangement into the values, so I have a little more of contrast on it. Yes, I blurred this information, yes, with the same information. So usually, this is something people like sometimes missed. So if you remove the blur from this equation, you're gonna get more of a sharp result. If you add a blur, you're gonna get more of a bubble result. And in this case, that's what we want. We want a little bit more of bubble result with a blur. Yes, let's say, let's copy this one here. Let's start to increase the intensity. You're gonna see that it starts to form like bubble. Many might even recognize this from a meat material because it's also being able to do it this way. So it's more like bubble in this case. So then what we're going to do is we're going to use a high pass grayscale. And I love high pass grayscale because it allows you to take as much information as you want. So we built the noise here. Yes, let's frame this. This would be noise generation. Then we come to the part where we start to extract the details. Yes. So in this one, we use the high pass grayscale to go from something like this to less contrast. So when we go to our levels, it's easier to take the information. You see how we start, like, we went from this, which has a lot of contrast, not much shaped, way too white. We went to this one where details are now more or less all to the same levels. And we use the levels to break that uniformity to build more depth into it. And then we blur it a little bit because we
I have a
don't
question.
Yeah.
So sorry. What
No,
is
it's
that
okay.
node again? The high pass?
So the high pass grayscale, what it does, like if
Okay.
you want to make a simple explanation, yes, you can, it's remove contrast. That would be the most easiest explanation. Yeah, you see that now I have a lot of contrast in this image, but as I lower the radius, it starts to lose contrast. See?
Okay.
So basically that's what
Awesome.
it
Thank you
does.
so much. Sorry about that.
No, it doesn't matter. Sorry, not problem. So by doing this, what I am achieving is actually generating the noise for my bricks, because no brick is just like, let's say, slim. It always have like detail on top. And for the brick, what I wanted to do, I wanted to, you know, generate as much detail as I can. And again, for this case, I'm using a specific mask. Yes. Now, for this mask, what I wanted to show you is the vector warp grayscale. Yeah. But in order to show you this, first I need to search for a specific node that should be around here. So yeah, I'm gonna copy this node back to this part. So I want to show you this really nice node. So this flat fill to random, of course, comes from the flat fill node. But this spectral warp grayscale, there's several ways of actually using it. So I'm going to show you two. So I'm going to copy this down here. I'm going to plug this in here. So I'm going to show you. This is the crunch we have at initial. Yes. This is how it looks after we apply the vector warp grayscale using flat fill to random color information. Yes. To warp the grunge map based in the information that we set in color. So we are using the random color because what the random color is doing actually here is trying to assign an ID color to each shape of your flat fill. So if we get this into the vector, what is going to happen is that every green, yes, for example, this three, every green color or every brick that has an identical color are going to have the same piece of information from the Grange, while the rest that have a different color are going to have different kinds of parts of the Grange map. Yeah. So let's get and try to do a live session or a live demonstration from this. So this is how it looks normal. And when it starts to increase the intensity, you're going to see it starts to break. And what happens is that no edge will match inside like the bricks. So the Grange information inside this brick is not going to match the information in the next brick. And so it's going to happen with the next one and the next one and the next one, as long as the color they have around here is completely different, you see? So if I look for two bricks that have the same color, I think like these two maybe. Not in particular. Well, I mean, they are a little bit similar in these two, yes, because they have the same color but not the same range or luminosity. So this is not the only way you can do this. Something that people forget is that when you create, yes, a gradient map, what you have is an input of grayscale information and an output of color information. And the vector warp grayscale warps things based on color information. So for example, if I get this flat fill to random color and set it to grayscale conversion, I'm gonna have a grayscale value, yes, or let's say, how could we call it as before, the flat fill to random grayscale, yes, map. And if we set it to our gradient map and we set it inside our vector, it's gonna work anyways, because we're feeding information that is color information, which has different values. Yes, each brick has a different value, just like in here. Now, it's my recommendation to do this if you don't want to waste so much memory. If you have some memory to spare, I would tell you to use a flat fill to random color. Yes, to generate specifically, yes, these kind of details where you can break up the tiling quite easily. So, if I'm not mistaken, this is the part I haven't labeled yet. So let's kind of look into it. So this is where I actually start breaking things up, if I'm not mistaken. So I start to pretty much destroy things in different ways. But I think this one is actually not activated. So we got a little bit more of details in here that they are not everywhere. Oh, this one is turned. Oh, okay. So this part is all turned off. So we're gonna go to the other part that we want to get into, which is actually, where is it? It should be around here. Yes, here, the cement. Yeah. So the cement is the next step that we want to go into. And we want to go into the cement part because it's the last thing that brings a lot of value to what we are doing, all that pulls all the things together. So if I have the bricks without the cement, this would the material wouldn't have sense. Yes. Just when we are at this moment or at this point or part of our material, you're gonna have a more like clarified or more specific material, yes, which will have more sense to what we are doing. So for this one, I had to get inside this. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna move this backwards and I'm gonna pull all of these here. Yes, and we're gonna go to this part in particular. Now remove this, not using it. And this part in particular is the cement. So when you're trying to build a cement for any kind of material where you have specific shapes and the cement is in between those shapes, you want to break up the cement in two parts. The first part is going to be the micro detail or the detail or surface detail of the cement. And the second part is going to be how the cement actually blends with the materials that it has around it. Yes. So what I did first was actually I came here and I started to blend in different kinds. Yes, as you can see here, different kinds of grunges one at a time, trying to match what was on my reference, in order to get the desired result. So this is pretty much exploration. There's actually no secret magic to this on on this side, I'm just grabbing, yes, the mobs that I feel that look more similar, or let's say close to the grunge I want to build, and I start blending them in different ways until I get an approximate of what I like, and I start to take a more specific direction, yes. But bear in mind I'm always using the high by grayscale because I want to lower that information and set a specific space. So this is how I remove a little bit more contrast. I add a little more contrast. And in here comes a little of the most like detailed part. So cement, usually what happens, it has kind of a base where it's all on the same level. Let's try to show it here. So cement has this. You see that cement has like overall it looks quite similar, but every now and then has a little some like little stones that are coming up, yes, out from the surface. So I try to build this using the same technique we did before. I'm using the black and white spots too because it has more like dot information in here, yes, as you can see. I just made this dot information smaller and I try to get these white dots a little bit more higher into information, as you can see here. Then I use a high pass in order to remove some or most of the contrast in it. And then I use a curve just to remove, yes, the information. So if you see here, I'm using this bottom one, yes, to remove the information I want to remove. Yeah, this is actually a really good way. And I think it's even easier than doing it with, you know, with your levels, because as you can see there's some information that is going to be like touched that we don't want to touch. Yeah, once again, a safe transform, we want this detail to be really small, and we add those details, yes, to our final surface. In here I just added a little bit more of like a combination of different, you see, noises, and that has different height variations, and that's how I close up my cement. Now this part in particular, the non-uniform blur, is just to add a little bit of blur to those sharp parts. Now the most important part is how can we build the actual shape, yes, of our cement, and how can we build it more like, again, like realistic. So first, if we want to build like the cement that is between the bricks, what we need to do is use the threshold node with the last patch, with the last blend node, where we have a change in the shape of our bricks. Yeah, I'm gonna explain why. So in these bricks around here, this with the part I haven't shown yet, we have these kind of broken parts. So if this is actually right broken and there's black information, that means that there's going to be cement in there. So if I want to grab that information, I need to grab this node. If I grab the node that is at the beginning, I mean, if I grab the main pattern, I'm going to lose a lot of information. In fact, let me get this one like this. And let us compare one with each other. You're going to see the actual difference between one and each other. You're going to see that one has the details we have already aligned. You see all in these edges, and the other doesn't have it. So would you want to get when you're building a brick wall, you want to get the last brick blend node before you start with the cement, and use a threshold. Now the threshold is going to allow you to make masks, yes, and you can go from greater to lower, yeah, to try and make a more specific mask on what you are trying to make. The more specific it is, the more realistic your result will be. So when you are doing this, yeah, what you want to go is you want to go for a bevel, and you want to get the positive and the negative sides. So you want to get the positive sides because you want to get that space between the bricks, and you want to like expand it and give it a small gradient like this one, yes, because you want to make the intersection between bricks and cement more realistic and that it doesn't look so sharp. And you want a negative part because you want to build, yes, these crevices around here. You want to build the parts that are like moving inwards in your cement. So you want to subtract the negative value to the positive value of your bevel. Now don't try to smooth things so much. So in this case, this bevel has a 0.17 smooth. I've seen people go like something like this just because they want a more soft result, and it doesn't ends up working. So it's okay if you want to add a little bit of soft result to your cement or your mortar, but at the end your cement is actually like a solid, so it's not gonna have that much of softness on it. So we are using a subtract to make these lines, and we're using a blur to make things a little more quiet. After that, we're going to the levels to increase the height of these parts that are going to be in touch with our bricks, and a purling noise with a multiply just to make a little bit of height difference in different places. So this is where things start to get a little bit messy, and it's how we actually start to add different kinds of details and noises to our mortar shape, and that's actually basically exploration. So in this case, I grab a clouds tool, that is usually what I use to make kind of like rocky or solid extraction into surface. Yes, I usually use the clouds tool for this one. I use a slow blur to get these kinds of shapes because I liked this middle shape, yes, these lines. And I use it with a multiply. So as you can see, the lines generated here are also generating lines in the shape of my mortar. Next one I did was actually building building a slow blur. So I built this one to have a little more like of edge destruction. I didn't want everything to be pretty much the same. I want to have different kinds of edge destruction in the edges of our bricks. And in this case, I use just one clouds tool with different kinds of slow blurs, which have different intensities. You can see that here it goes from 0.15 to 0.25. And they are also using different masks as well. As you can see, what I did here was for the first slow blur, I used a purling noise, and for the second slow blur, I used the invert version of the first purling noise to combine both of them together. Once you have that, the only thing you need to do is just blur a little bit the information, and you just blend them together. And this is the result you're gonna get, but don't worry about it. You're gonna see how it changes later. So right now, what you might want to do, if you want to make your cement a little bit more like wobbly, or let's say of a mess, what you do is you just use directional word with the intensity input being your clouds tool in this case, or you can use your own brick displacement. Don't go so hard on it, because out of the blue your cement is gonna be outlined from your brick pattern, and you don't want that. So try to use something that doesn't move your cement base too much from its place. And once again, we close this with a little bit of soften in the edges. So you can see here the difference. We are softening a little bit the edges. Now, where does the magic comes? How do we go from this to this? Well, all of this magic is just because of the high blend. So the high blend is actually one of the most beneficial nodes, and the last one we are gonna see, yes, in order to build a brick world right now. And the magic it has is that we can change the contrast. Yes, and you see it's going to change our material. So you always want to use your contrast on 1, and it's going to depend how you set your height offset, which is not changing right now, which is weird. Oh, I'm changing the intensity, my bad. So if you want to change your height offset, you can do it this way, but you're gonna see that it's gonna change in different ways, and it's not changing as I expected because I'm taking the cement drops, so that's my bad. Let's go backwards. It was this one. So here, let's break this one down, plug this one in, and let's see what happens when I lower the contrast. You see how now it changed the intersection between the bricks and the cement when I lower the contrast, and if I put the contrast higher, I'm gonna get, so the higher the contrast you use, the more similar the blend is going to be to the one you built before. Now, if you're gonna get that kind of sharp edges between your bricks and your cement, you just go to this kind of contrast, like less than 0.9 is gonna make your day on this one, and you're gonna have this kind of boring like layout. But again, if you use this rail, you're gonna see that you need to find the right spot, because if you go too hard, you're gonna break your bricks. If you go too soft, your cement is not gonna be even there. But if you go with the right amount, as I did here, which is 0.35, you're gonna have a really good detail in the normal map. Any kind of questions so far, guys? Any specific question on this?
I have a question. So how do you know the scale of a material? So when we are doing a brick kind of pattern, we have to know the scale, right? If we are like a real size scale. So how do we get to know that?
So how, let's say I made a noise and I want to make that noise like smaller. How do I resize it without breaking the tiling, you mean?
No, no, no. I'm for the brick material. You
Mm,
made the brick material, right?
yes.
So how do you know this when I used in a surface or environment? It is really sized. Real world is it is in a real world size. So
Oh, how do you realize
yeah,
if
it is
it's
in a
in...
real.
So usually what people do
Yeah.
is they use textual density. In this case, if you're using these kinds of materials and you're working in your portfolio, and well, when you work in a studio, you do have a line, or sorry, a line, a guide, which provides you with the texture density you need to use. But in this case, if you don't have one, what you can do is by using this kind of, reference images where you have photoscan data, you already have the solution here. So you basically, in this case, you need to count how many bricks you count from left to right. Yes, and how many bricks you count from top to bottom. So you see you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bricks from left to right, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So you see, so then when you go to your material and you come here to your X and Y amount, what you only need to do is you need to change these parameters. So you go from 10, you see I went 10 and 14, more or less what I have in this wall, but a little bit more maybe, because I wanted to make something different. But that's how you manage it. Now there's another way that is a little bit more of like, okay, you have to do some math on calculating how big is an unusual brick in, I don't know, Europe. So you say this brick is more or less around this size and I want it to be 10 of them, so you need to make kind of a math. I haven't used that in a while. I haven't seen that in a while, but that's the only way. Like right now, if you want with this material, what you could do is actually tile it. Yeah, you go to material section and you tile it, but that's not gonna get the result that you want. It's gonna tile the whole material as you build it right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys, do you have... Okay. So do you guys have another question?
Using a tile random generator, wouldn't it give a close result to what you get using the two tile generators and the masks?
Sorry, which one? The tile generator you meant? The masks that are near the tile generator?
The tile generator random.
Yes, what happens with that node?
I mean, if you could get a result similar to the one you have with the two tile generators you use and the mask.
So I'm not gonna tell you it's impossible because I'm sure it's possible. I'm actually not sure about it because I haven't used the tile random that much. I'm more of doing things a little bit more by hand and then exposing the parameters to make something, a little bit more like procedural. But I guess that if you change parameters to be the same, let's say 18 here and 18 here. Yes, and we are gonna leave this one as it is, and we're gonna get into the other one and make some changes. Come on, designer. And make some changes in here. Let's say. No, let's do something more like this. Yes, and I then do flat fill to flat fill random grayscale, and from there we go for a histogram scan, contrast on 1, and I choose, let's say, to 20% of everything, and then I go for a blend, a copy, and I set the mask. It's gonna work. I mean, it works, but in order for it to work, you need to actually build this very specific, because as you can see, the size,
Okay.
the thing with this being so random is that you don't have actually that much control. So you actually can't use that much the random technique. If you go for something, if you try to use a tool where you have more control or more specific control of everything, and then you can build something random. So I could literally go in here, yes, and build this part as a tile generator node with random attributes in another graph. So I can make my own node. The only thing that I would have to do is do something a little more advanced in here, where, for example, yes, let's say I grab this node, yeah, let's say I grab this one. So I go for this one, and I'm going to expose this as a new graph input. So I'm gonna set it as X amount, and I'm gonna set this as test, just to show, yeah. And I'm gonna expose TY, and again, same group, test, okay. So what I'm going to do to make this a little more procedural, maybe it's just copy and paste, yes. So now both nodes, yes, have the same exposed parameters, and they're gonna change both at the same time. And what I'm going to do is just copy the parameters here where I make a change. Okay, so now if I plug these ones to the pattern, yeah, and I come here, let's say I'm gonna make something quite like this maybe, and let's do a little bit like 0.01, or let's 0.5 of random rotation, a little bit less of scale. And now I double click on the background of my graph, and I go to my preview part. I'm gonna have the X and Y amount, and if I change this, you're gonna see that I'm gonna change the tiling of my material, but the actual parameters are gonna just be the same, you see?
Yes.
So that's how you can actually make yourself a more like you're gonna have more control. The more control you have over something you build, the more useful it's going to be for you and your core workers as well. Yes, that's something really important to know. Because that's actually, again, it's quite normal that many people try to use pre-made things or automatic or let's say random generators. And what happened with those random generators is that they are so random, or they were built for a specific thing, that they may not be useful for what you are trying to do. That's the most common thing to happen right now. Yeah, because what the problem you're going to face in your material is going to be completely different to the problem the person who did this node had to face. So the solution might be, or is going to be most probably different. Yes?
Yeah, got it.
Perfect.
I do have another question though.
Yeah.
How do you approach making the details for your mortar, the cement between your bricks?
So
because
the surface detail or the shape of the mortar between the bricks?
No, the surface detail, because I can imagine it's mainly exploration. But how do you for example, if I want to make an asphalt material,
Well, so
how would I know if I'm using the right nodes or not? Like if I'm using the right shape, and how do I know I'm going to the right direction?
In order to do that, what you need to do is first you need to have like a really good reference. Yes. In this case, I had all of these photoscan data. That's what the thing I'm using. And what follows me, or like actually not follows, but actually like it's quite useful for me, is that these kinds of images downloading on 4K maybe, they show you the details. Yes, you can see like the small shapes. So you can see here I have a shape. Yes, in here I have another shape, and I have a negative space. So I start to see the different shapes I see in this image. Like I'm really zooming. I mean, my eyes are on top of this. I'm not seeing anything else but the cement. Yes. So I start to see all of these details, and I try to, yes, when I go to designer, let me go back to designer. What I try to do is I try to look first for all the texture generators I can have at hand. Also filters as well, that I know that are going to have similar kind of information. Like for example, when you go and you look into cement, you see cement is a mixture of sand and stone. Yes, so basically it's all gonna be dots. Yes, and a combination of them. So I'm gonna start looking for different kinds of grunge maps. Dirt, yeah, I know. Let's go for dirt 4 as well. So I'm gonna start to blend these together, and I'm gonna do this with a normal at hand, and I'm gonna follow this by actually exploring. So again, it's just exploration. So I'm gonna get this here. in this case. So look, right now, my normal map is a little bit closer to what the cement looks. I just combined two different details. Now I could go a little bit higher into detail and go with high pass grayscale. Yes, to change a little bit more the information. Yeah. Now, yeah, I have a little more contrast. There's no change in here, but yes, in my height. So I'm gonna get a little bit of blur, because I'm gonna get a blur because I feel this one is way too like circle and too obvious. So I'm gonna get this here. I'm gonna get this to 0.1, and this is starting to feel a little bit more like cement, isn't it? Like the plaster. Right now, no, but if I go here, yes. So I'm gonna get all levels just to have an extra sharpen. Gonna pull this a little bit backwards. Yeah, this one here. And usually what I would do is I would try to, let's see. Okay, this one here. This one here. Let's start to stay with this one. So once I have like kind of a base, yes, where I have several kinds of details on top, one of the other ways of actually realizing if what you're doing is on the right path or not is looking your map from far away and looking your map from close shots. Yes, so you're gonna see and you're gonna recognize it. Yes, also always try to do with your reference on your left. In this case, I already did it several times in the last 4 to 5 months. But another trick would be using that blue noise fast. And we want to use this because I said it before, but sometimes when you go around here, you see that there's small pieces of like balls of cement that they're like pointing out of the surface, and you want to catch that as well. So blue noise cement, in this case, if I do an HQ blur, so it's 0.1, I'm gonna get this kind of noise. So I'm gonna get the levels to make this a little bit better. I want to have it a little bit more like this. So I want to have a little like, I want this to be more like points than a huge noise that is all plugging together. Gonna get a blend as well. Plug this in. Yeah. Try to make this from this to this so you can see the difference. Trying to do not that much. There we go. What I'm going to do next is actually, in fact, you know what? I'm gonna leave this one here. What I'm going to do is use a small blur because I feel it's too sharp. And see how this goes around, so it's a little bit better. 0.05. Great. And I think I might as well try, let's try in another way. Let's do a histogram scan. Yeah, histogram scan, I think it's gonna work better. Let's see. No, so we're gonna go back to the other one. So I'm trying to build step by step the details of everything I have, you see? And that's how I usually approach actually making something like cement. Like same happened around here when I'm building the cement. If you look at this, and just overlaying layers that I went on trying until I get the result I wanted to. Yes, close enough to what I was trying to build. Was that useful?
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. So
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question, sir.
No, it's okay.
So how do you approach with this in a normal details? So you said you'd be like choosing to build step by step. So if we are building step by step while like blending everything together, we might be losing some of the data in between. So like like for that, how do we cope with that? So did you do some kind of normal blend, like taking some the details that you wanted to specially appear, taking that one and blending with main normal? Like how do you approach
So
with
you're
the
asking
details?
how to blend the things without losing detail on the normal?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So in this case, yes, what I usually do is that at the end of my material, I have a sharpen. That's as fast as it goes. So if I get a normal around here and I plug it to what's before, you're gonna see it feels a little bit blur. If I add a sharpen, it changes everything. So that's one of the first steps. The second step will be that you need to understand when you are using a height blend, you are changing, yes, the grayscale value of everything, because you're starting to blend things. So if you have to blend things, that means that you're gonna have to get one of the both images information and put it down while the other one stays in the same value. Meaning that in this case, when I start to put the bricks on top of the cement, the information of the bricks starts to lower a little bit. And then I start to do the same with the rest of the things, but and try to maintain in the same spot always, yes, without harming. So if you use a height blend, this shouldn't happen, yes. But again, if you want to blend different kinds of information, but we might have to leave this for another kind of material because it wouldn't be the exact same. You have what's called a normal blend, where you can blend two normals with a mask. So basically, you can like superpose normals. I think you also have normal combined for these cases where you want to, mix. Let's say I grab this one as well. Yeah, let's come around here. Let's say blend them together. No, this is not the one we were looking for. Where was it? This one's. So let's say we want to get all of these kind of noise I built just now, and we want to blend it with everything. So I will have to, get the normal normal, and set it here, and I'll be combining them together, and I can change them as I want. But if you want to go deeper into it, I'm gonna be making a material later in the next weeks before starting with another course. I'm gonna be making a material where I'm gonna blend photo scan information with handmade substance design materials, and we're gonna have to do that yes or yes. That there's no other option in that case. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Great. Okay, guys, I have to leave. Thanks for coming. Really thankful for all you presenting today, and I hope that you enjoyed the class.